Hey everyone, it's Kale from Scud Style, and today I wanted to do a little bit of a video analysis of a Time Health magazine article. This is the most recent Time Health, and an article about why having sex makes you feel better the next day, and I'm going to do a little bit of analysis on current pro-sex propaganda. And I'm not against sex at all costs or anything like that, but the way this article is written, it seems to be really misleading. It doesn't reference a lot of specific scientific anything, and I think a lot of what it's referring to could easily be substituted or referring to something else. So I just want to kind of go to, it's a half page here, and this is what it looks like. So if anyone wants to look at this article for themselves, by all means. I just thought it was interesting to note some things while I was reading this article, so I just want to go through it. So in the sexuality section, why having sex makes you feel better the next day. And under the picture it said it's fun, it feels good, and it boosts mental health. What's not to like? So let's see what about this does those things and what those claims are substantiated by. By Andrew Gregory. Sex has long been linked to a lengthened life and lower risk of cardiovascular disease, but new research provides scientific support for a familiar idea, that sex also strengthens the bond of relationships and adds happiness and meaning to life. A paper published in the journal Emotion by Todd Kashdan and colleagues at George Mason University used daily diaries to examine the link between sexual behavior and well-being. 152 college students were asked to keep a record of their sexual behaviors, emotions, and feelings every day for 3 weeks. People reported being happier and finding more meaning in their lives the day after any kind of sexual activity, from deep kissing to intercourse, the researchers found. This link did not depend on how satisfying or intimate the experience was, or whether they were in a relationship. Any sort of sexual experience seemed to improve well-being. However, the opposite was not true. Happiness did not predict more sexual behavior, which bolsters their claim that the link between sex and well-being is due to sex itself. Humans' fundamental need to belong is likely at the root of the effect, Kashdan says, and sexual conduct is a communication of acceptance and social inclusion. There is something profound about someone else giving you access to their body and accepting access to yours, Kashdan says. Other research by Kashdan points to a link between sex and social inclusion. Using a similar method of daily diaries, people recorded their sexual experiences, worried of being judged by others and feelings of inferiority. The day after a pleasurable sexual experience, those with clinical levels of social anxiety seemed to show a greater benefit from sex than those with low social anxiety. Compared with days when they hadn't been sexual, they were less concerned with how people viewed them and held themselves in higher esteem. But a person's relationship with a sexual partner matters too. When all participants were asked to rate how close and connected they felt to their partner during sex, that rating did not accurately predict well-being the next day. However, when examining those in romantic relationships, additional feelings of well-being did come from especially satisfying and intimate sexual contact. In these cases, Kashdan says, the sexual experience gives rise to a personal reaffirmation and a sense of benevolence that is beneficial to the relationship. Across all types of relationships, sex is an important therapeutic way of enhancing well-being and connecting with a partner. Kashdan says, it's a powerful potential antidote to loneliness and social isolation, a therapy without therapists, he says. When social bonds are more important than ever, one solution may lie in the bedroom. End of article. So, I only read this article once and haven't done like a crazy in-depth analysis, but I thought I'd just walk through a few points and a few different things that I thought were interesting or kind of unsupported, and go through step by step and point out some of this stuff. So, sex has long been linked to a lengthened life and lower risk of cardiovascular disease. There's no citations of what about sex does that. I would say lengthened life because of maybe happiness, people having more sex, or probably in longer-term relationships where they feel supported, loved, connected to someone. That's probably an important thing for a longer life. And a lower risk of cardiovascular disease, aka exercise, I would assume. You know, you can get exercise without having sex, and there are far more impressive forms of exercise than sexual intercourse or any type of sexual activity. So moving on, supports the familiar idea that sex also strengthens the bonds of relationships and adds to happiness and meaning to life. So that is a very strong claim. I would say that any kind of intimate relationship adds happiness to life. So having more friends, having a deeper relationship with a partner or with a family member or with with a spouse. Absolutely, but I think sex can be an opportunity to express intimacy, but it isn't needed to achieve that level of it necessarily. A paper published in the Journal of Emotion by Todd Kashdan and colleagues at George Mason used daily diaries to examine the link between sexual behavior and well-being. 152 college students were asked to keep a record of their sexual behaviors, emotions, and feelings every day for 3 weeks. And I think that is a horribly problematic demographic for noting their behavior in relation to sexual activity. Because when I was in college, not that long ago, I would absolutely note a link, and this has nothing to do with intimacy, nothing to do with emotion, for males especially, that I noticed. I can't speak to the females as well because I was not a female, did not speak to females much about this. But after a sexual experience with a random encounter, a hookup, or with your girlfriend or the girl that you're into and having them like, or I'm sure, for guys as well, whatever, it's an incredibly validating experience for someone to want to take a sexual step with you, or for you to be granted access to kind of that. It's reaffirming. It's an ego boost, right? If you're able to get to that level with someone, whether you just met them or you've been progressing, of course you're going to feel better afterwards. It isn't the sexual expenditure. It isn't like, oh yeah, because there's no reference in here about sexual health, about orgasm or anything like that. So for me, it's kind of shaky that it's sex as much as it is connection or ego or validation, right? Self-confidence. Oh yeah, my friends now think I'm cool because I was able to hook up with this person, right? There's all kinds of factors in there. So I think a college demographic is really problematic because there's a lot of hookup culture in college for both men and for women. And it validates both and increases confidence in both. So people reported being happier and finding more meaning in their lives the day after any kind of sexual activity. I think the meaning in the life is kind of a stretch. It's like, oh, my life is more meaningful now that I hooked up with someone, or now that I had sex with my girlfriend last night, or with my boyfriend, whatever. And so I think that's kind of an interesting stretch and take on this. It's absolutely possible, but I think, again, in the context of feeling included, feeling better about myself, makes my life appear to have more meaning because I feel better, just in general. All right, this link did not depend on how satisfying or intimate the experience was or whether they were in a relationship. So that to me says ego boost, right? Validation. It isn't like, oh, I have this deep, profound connection, I'm happier. It's like, yeah, dude, I got it in last night. It was awesome. I'm the man, or even for females, I'm sure it's the same kind of thing. If there's loneliness or something, connecting with someone even for one night, or if it's in the context of a relationship and it makes you feel included, great. You probably feel better about yourself. Although, of course, for men and for women, there are those times when they do sexual activity and they regret it. But oftentimes that kind of sinks in more than just an immediate reaction. There's also that kind of like, oh, that was nice, as long as the interaction went well, which hopefully they often do, or you won't be getting yourself into that situation again. Any sort of sexual experience seemed to improve well-being. However, the opposite was not true. Happiness did not predict more sexual behavior, which bolsters their claim that the link between sex and well-being is due to sex itself. Again, this is nothing really new. I just think that it's like a bolstering experience. So it's saying there's no necessarily like medical claim that, it's not talking about oxytocin. It's not talking about dopamine. It's not talking about these kinds of things. And we notice that there is a bit of a crash. Oxytocin is for bonding. And so one night stands, that bonding doesn't really happen to the same degree as an ongoing thing. Humans' fundamental need to belong is likely the root of this effect. Duh. That's kind of my point. I think the whole thing is just belonging. I think it's more friendship, human connection, human intimacy. And sexual contact is a communication of acceptance and social inclusion. Right. So sex isn't exclusive to being accepted or being included. It is a powerful form of that. It's powerfully validating, and especially in our culture where it's kind of a way of keeping score among cool groups when you're younger, especially when they use college-age students. But I'll digress from that. Other research by Cashdan points to a link between sex and social inclusion, right? I think you could replace sex in this article with social inclusion or with intimacy, and everything would make sense and be fine. So I think it's more about that aspect than it is about the physical act of sex, right? The day after a pleasurable sexual experience, those with clinical levels of social anxiety seem to show a greater benefit from sex than those with low social anxiety. And to me, it seems like that's because they just had this great breakthrough where they had this human experience and they had this bond and connection and acceptance and social interaction, which helps alleviate some of that social anxiety. When you have more friends and you have deeper connections and intimacy with those friends or with, you know, people you just met or on any level across the board, I think it's going to lower anxiety. I'm not a doctor, please. These are just my basic responses, gut responses to these types of things. So compared with days when they hadn't been sexual, they were less concerned with how people viewed them and held themselves in higher esteem. Makes sense. Ask any college student if their self-esteem goes up after having a positive sexual experience with someone, whether it's someone new or it's someone they've been with for a long time. But a person's relationship with a sexual partner matters too. When all participants were asked how to rate how close and connected they felt to their partner during sex, that rating did not accurately predict well-being the next day. So this is saying that, from my understanding, someone who's in a relationship having sex with their partner, who they've done tons of times, doesn't feel any better with someone they're really connected to than someone who necessarily just went out and had a hookup. So for me, I don't think it's happiness or well-being as much as it is an ego boost and self-esteem. That's kind of what it looks like to me. You get more self-esteem from new experiences and from kind of flipping any kind of questions of, oh, am I good enough? Am I attractive enough? Am I capable enough? And blah, blah, blah. And it's a reason why I think a lot of guys turn to pickup, because they see that as a form of self-mastery, that if they can attract more women, then they're better people, right? They're more powerful men, is kind of the thing that they're sold. So for this, it's like, okay, if I can have an interaction with someone new, then I'm getting better. I'm getting better as a person, right? When if it's the same old with a partner, it's kind of like there is no additional ego boost there. However, when examining those in romantic relationships, additional feelings of well-being did come from especially satisfying and intimate sexual contact. In these cases, Cashdan says, the sexual experience gives rise to a personal reaffirmation and sense of benevolence that has been beneficial to the relationship. Yeah, as if it's an intimate act and it's done as a form of intimacy and love, of course that's good for the relationship. But it's also good for the relationship to show benevolence and intimacy and love in other forms than simply just necessarily in a sexual way. So sex can be one form of expressing that, but I think the correct way I would say, so by showing personal reaffirmation to a sense of benevolence is beneficial to the relationship. That's true. Sex can be one form of that, but not every form of sex in a relationship actually leads to that, in my experience. And across all types of relationships, sex is an important therapeutic way of enhancing well-being and connecting with a partner. It's a powerful potential antidote to loneliness or social isolation. A therapy without therapists. When social bonds are more important than ever, one solution may lie in the bedroom. So it's saying social bonds are what's important. Sex may be a form of increasing social bonds. But by saying increasing your social bonds with your partner, with your friends, with strangers, with people you just meet, with your family, will increase the quality of your life. All for it. But it doesn't really speak to how sex specifically gets into any of that. It doesn't show any kind of scientific data about physical effects of sex or anything like that. And this to me just came across as just a typical kind of sex-positive propaganda from a medical magazine. And so it says, why having sex makes you feel better the next day? I would replace that with why having friends makes you feel better the next day. Why being intimate with people and having human connection and human experience. So I personally am all for human experience and connection and wish you all the best of those.